How come Billy and Zach didn't call Zordon? Hey everyone, and welcome to another Ranger Rant on March 9234. Today I'll be discussing episode 5 from MMPR season 2 titled Putty on the Brain. Now this episode is not adapted from any Super Sentai episode. Again, since this is the beginning of season 2, they're still using the Ju2 footage being spliced together with the Die Ranger footage. So the episode starts off with the establishing shot of Angel Girl High. Now I always never liked this shot of the Angel Girl High School because no matter what time or wherever they ever pointed the camera at the school, they never had the correct sign. If you always look closely, the Angel Grove section of the word is actually darker than the original high school's logo of the word. So we finally head into the school and we basically see that Zach is coming to Billy with some new special kind of cool looking glasses, and Billy checks them out and he says, well, this is great for the lab experiment we're planning to do. These glasses are specifically perfect for, you know, looking cool and also protecting their eyes from any kind of explosions of some sort. So as usual, Lord Zed is spying on the Ranger and devised a plan to basically break up the team by causing Billy and Zach, when they put on the glasses, will automatically see the other Rangers to look like putties. I particularly really like this episode, mainly because it's an original story, and especially because it was never actually copied ever again in any future PR episode. So unfortunately, Billy notices that Tommy's coming in, so they want to impress the guys about the new glasses they're going to be showing off when they're doing their lab work. And unfortunately, Zach and Billy put on the glasses, and Billy and Zach are getting totally confused seeing a putty in the hallway and no one reacting. Now the main issues with this episode is that I don't know what they were trying to do because there were some things that were kind of confusing. Billy and Zach are pretty smart, but in this episode they were acting totally dumb in the sake that, yes, Billy and Zach are seeing the putties. That would be totally disorienting to anybody because you would get freaked out that you see putties in school, but then again you're seeing them act like, you know, Tommy, Jason, and Kimberly in the scene and have their voices. So I don't understand why they didn't put two and two together right away and figured out those are their friends, but they were basically ignoring this and were about to and wanted to attack them. The thing I do like to commend though is the suit actors in this particular episode, because again, the putties in this circumstance have to act like Jason, Tommy, Trini, and Kimberly, so they have to have their mannerisms, the way they walk. It was really cool that the suit actors in those putty suits were actually able to pull it off really well. So unfortunately, since Zach and Billy are totally confused with the situation, attempt to try to attack, you know, Kimberly and Jason and Tommy, and when unfortunately the principal walked in when Zach actually tried to lunge to the putties. Now I'm kind of surprised that the principal was lenient in this sake, because basically Zach kind of attempted to punch the principal. In a real life circumstance, this more likely would have gotten them expelled. So unfortunately, when Billy and Zach get pulled away by the principal, we finally head to Bulk and Skull and find out what they're basically doing. At this point in time in season 2, Bulk and Skull are trying to figure out who the Power Rangers are, so they've been doing various weird experiments. But in this particular episode, they had the best plan out of all of them. Basically using an audio tape recorder to record everyone's voices who they hang out with, which is actually a really good plan because this is actually pretty much the only logical way they could actually figure out who the Power Rangers are, because again, the only thing that the suits can't cover up in their identities is their voices. So this was actually a really good plan. Unfortunately, this plan was never actually brought up again and never followed through. So as usual, Bulk and Skull are having, you know, the fun comedy moment where they actually, for a split second, think, well, maybe Bulk is the Power Ranger or maybe Skull is the Power Ranger. And unfortunately, since Bulk and Skull are in the hallway, Miss Appleby calls them in to actually help her in order to feed the iguana. Now, I particularly never understood why Miss Appleby actually trusted Bulk and Skull. There were so many times where they have screwed up, and so many times in classes, why she would ever trust them to do anything for her. For whatever reason, Lord Zed is actually spying on Bulk and Skull. Maybe because Bulk and Skull are the Power Rangers' friends. I'm not really exactly sure why he follows them. And as usual, Bulk and Skull are always in the wrong place at the wrong time when it comes to monsters. Now, as usual, Bulk and Skull don't care of what they're doing and basically throw in all the iguana food into the tank, which is kind of stupid. I mean, it's not really funny, and two, you're gonna just get the teacher to yell at you later on. The iguana food didn't look like iguana food. It looked more like Cheerios. If you look closely on several of the close-up shots, you can actually see, you know, the Cheerios circles and other alphabet letters. Now, the thing that totally bugged me for the entire episode is that how come Billy or Zach did not contact Zordon at all of the situation? The two of them were basically totally confused what's going on. They didn't put it together right away that those were, you know, Kimberly, Trini, Tommy, and Jason. and they were just wondering what's going on. It would have been really easy if they simply just called Zordon of the situation, and they would have simply had figured it out. So basically after school, and thanks to Skull accidentally pushing the play button while he was recording all the voices in the classroom, we finally see that Billy and Zach and both Skull are inside the detention area, and Billy and Zach are trying to figure out the situation. And they're finally putting two and two together. Basically, Zordon has put a spell on them that they see their fellow Rangers as putties. So finally after detention, we see that Billy and Zach are finally heading toward Billy's lab and basically trying to figure out how to stop this thing. And unfortunately, they get interrupted by, the real putties. Eventually, Zordon and Alpha finally notify the other Rangers that Billy and Zach are under attack, and the other Rangers come in. But unfortunately, when the Rangers teleport into the situation and they don't have their school backpacks or any kind of identifiable thing, Billy and Zach are totally confused who is who. Now, as usual, we get a really good fight scene with the entire team. Now, unfortunately, for whatever reason, they were fiddling around with the speeds of the entire fight scene. If you notice, at certain times, you'll actually see the footage actually is sped up or slowed down. I'm not exactly sure why this happens. I mean, they do it time to time, but in this particular episode and fight scene, they did it a lot. Usually when they speed up footage, it's usually there to help in order to sell a punch. So they usually speed up the film in order to make that, that final impact, look like a real punch. But in this case, they were also slowing down the footage. I'm not exactly sure why this was going on, but my theory is that there might have been a censoring issue because maybe this fight went on too long, or they particularly didn't like how the Rangers were fighting the putties. So after all the Rangers finally defeat all the Z Putties, eventually everyone finally regroups and finally teleports to the command center where Billy and Zach finally tell Zordon what's going on. So of course Zordon and Alpha trying to devise a plan in order to counteract Lord Zed's spell on Billy and Zach's eyes when all of a sudden they finally get interrupted by the new monster on the viewing globe. So unfortunately the monster takes precedent, so Zach and Billy head to the lab and actually build a special cooling device to counteract the monster's flame breath ability. Now, while Billy and Zach are inside Billy's lab building the cooling device, Trini basically contacts them in order to test a theory and basically morphs in front of them to see if the suits actually block the spell of Lord Zed. Fortunately enough, it actually does. Now, the thing I really hated about this moment is that this was one of the very few times Trini morphed alone. She's the one who got screwed out of saying, "It's morphin' time." Now, I do like to point out one thing. The Yellow Ranger suit in this scene was actually different than the one they traditionally used during the late Season 1's and beginning of Season 2 point. Now, as I've told you in past rants, the reason why America doesn't use the cool reflective material in the suits like Japan does is because that material rips much more often. But in this case, Trini was actually wearing the gold suit. This suit was either the original suit that was used in the earlier episodes of Season 1, or it could have been a backup Master Jew Ranger suit. Because again, even though America doesn't use the Japanese suits, Japan does send them over some of their Master suits for them to look over and obviously redesign into the more stronger material. Also, if you look at the Power Morph, unfortunately the suit is actually missing the Power Ranger stickers on the Power Morph. Now this scene also brings up another puzzling problem in the episode. How come Billy and Zach don't see themselves as putties? Because basically when Bulk and Skull put the glasses on, we actually saw Billy and Zach as putties. So how come Billy and Zach don't see themselves as putties? Now, unfortunately, the iguana started to begin his attack prior to Billy completing his cooling device. So unfortunately, at this point in time in the series, Tommy's powers are still being drained, so unfortunately, he can't basically join them in the fight, while the other Rangers finally teleport to the beach area fighting off some Z Putties, while Billy and Zach get ambushed by the Salmon-Iguana monster. Now, a lot of times in PR, they don't always usually get the locations perfectly exact switching between MMPR footage and U-Ranger footage. But in this case, it was really bad. The beginning portion of the fight with the Z Putties began on a beach. We can see the sand, we can see the water, but when they switch over to the Ju 2 footage with the Salmon-Iguana fighting Billy and Zach, all of a sudden they're in a rock quarry. Since Billy left the lab before he completed his device, and the Salmon-Iguana finally attacked him with his fire breath, so the device didn't actually work correctly. Billy had to act as a distraction while Zach was trying to figure out what's going on. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Why of all people, Billy is the one acting as a distraction when Billy was the one who built the cooling device? Shouldn't Zach have been the distraction while Billy was trying to repair it? Now, for the most part, when Saban ordered the Ju 2 footage, Japan basically had to be consistent with, the MMPR cast's traits and personalities, and for the most part, they were. But in this scene, it didn't make any sense. It basically totally forgot that Billy was a genius and Zach was the fighter, and they should have swapped the roles around. So eventually, after a while, Billy finally figures out what's wrong with it, and thanks to Trini telling them to bring a backup chip with the cooling device, he finally installs it, and eventually, finally, they were able to actually defeat the monster. As usual, Lord Zed uses his enlarging bomb. Again, we're dealing with the Die Ranger footage being spliced again with the Ju2 footage. But unfortunately, in this particular episode, it's really kind of bad. Now, of course, the main problem with splicing footage is that they can't have these Zords interact with the monster because, again, the monster's really fighting the original Megazord. Now, the big problem with this fight scene was the iguana's special ability, the elongating tongue that wraps around it. There were a couple of Die Ranger monsters that did have, tentacles. So if you look really closely in the Die Ranger footage, the tongue changes color from red to black and it turns into a tube. So eventually, the Thunder Megazord overpowers the Salmon-Iguana by cutting off its tongue, and eventually, finally defeats him with the Thunder Megazord's sword finisher move. If you look really closely, when the Thunder Megazord actually cuts the Salmon-Iguana's tongue, you'll actually get a split-second glimpse of the original Megazord's sword. Now, the cool thing I like to point out, though, is that they actually finally took the extra time and actually correctly spliced in the Die Ranger's sword finisher effect, because normally in earlier MMPR episodes, when they were dealing with the splice footage, they usually would just simply, see the Thunder Megazord's slash move, but then all of a sudden we would cut to a shot where the monster's being blown up with the original Megazord's sword finisher would do. We finally head back to Angel Grove High, and we basically see that Tommy, Kimberly, and Jason come back from the command center, and we basically find out that, Alpha's finally figure out what's going on inside the glasses, and basically bathes the glasses into some sort of energy beam, and finally counteracts Lord Zed's spell. Now, for this episode, I have to give it a 4 out of 5. I mean, it was a really good episode. It was unique. It was an original story that hasn't been done in PR ever since. I also really like the hard suit work that the putties were doing, basically, interacting with, stuff that's weird for them to hold, like, school bags and books and handing out paper. That was really a nice and funny touch. But I do have to complain about the main issue with the episode. How come Billy and Zach didn't tell Zordon of the situation? Because basically Zordon and Alpha would have started to figure out what's going on and try to counteract the situation and also alert the Rangers of what's going on. Another thing they could have also done is Billy could have called the Rangers through their communicators. If they really didn't trust that they were looking at the Rangers but seeing putties, they could have called them to the communicators, and that would have easily had confirmed that these were the MMPR Rangers. Another thing that was kind of confusing is that how come Billy and Zach didn't see themselves as putties? The spell works on people who are Power Rangers, so Billy and Zach should have seen themselves as putties. Bulk and Skull confirmed this. What do you guys personally think about this episode? Do you think this episode was really good because, again, it involved Bulk and Skull into the story, and of course it was a unique story, an original American story, and of course this story has not been repeated in PR ever since? Or do you think it was kind of a dumb story because, again, Billy and Zach were not really, smart in this episode, and also Bulk and Skull's really good plan to record people's voices got totally dropped and never brought up ever again in future episodes? Of course, leave your comments below on what you think about this episode, and of course, leave your comments below on what future episodes you would like me to review. For next week's rant, I'll be discussing Destined for Greatness from Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys right back here next week.